Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thank you for joining us. President Biden is in the United Kingdom trying to reestablish the U.S.'s role as leader in the global vaccination efforts. The president is announcing his plan to donate 500 million doses of the coronavirus vaccine over the course of the next year. The doses will be distributed to countries struggling to fight the coronavirus pandemic. The first doses are expected to be delivered by the end of the summer. President Biden is meeting with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson today in Cornwall. The meeting comes one day before the highly anticipated G7 summit. CBS News' Skylar Henry has more.
President Biden remains focused on the coronavirus pandemic on his first full day of his overseas trip.
It's a great pleasure, Mr. President, to welcome you to Cornwall.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
The president met with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson this morning, where the two discussed a number of issues, including when to lift COVID travel restrictions between the two countries. This comes as the U.S. announced it's purchasing 500 million COVID vaccine doses to donate to 92 low and lower middle income countries and the 55 member states of the African Union.
Make sure it's distributed equitably and to the countries that need help the most.
The White House says the vaccine doses will cost $3.5 billion and will come from money already approved by Congress.
We have to end COVID-19, not just at home, which we're doing, but everywhere.
But while the president is still at the start of his trip, the meeting next week with Russian President Vladimir Putin still looms large.
We're not seeking conflict with Russia. We want a stable, predictable relationship. But I've been clear. The United States will respond in a robust and meaningful way when the Russian government engages in harmful activities.
The president says he'll discuss the growing number of cyber attacks coming out of Russia when he meets with Putin. Skylar Henry, CBS News, the White House.
CBS News correspondent Christina Ruffini joins us now with more on all this. Hi, Christina. Great to see you. So President Biden is meeting with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson ahead of the G7 summit. What are the two discussing during today's meeting? What will be some of the thornier things they have to tackle?
Well, hi, it's nice to see you as well. As our colleague Skylar mentioned, they're going to talk about COVID travel and the inconsistencies with the fact that, vaccinated Americans are being let in a lot of places overseas, but that's not reciprocal for people for the UK in most cases yet. They're going to talk about trying to get international travel back to business between the UK and the US. They're also going to try to talk about a trade deal between the UK and the US because if you remember, the US has a trade deal with the EU, but since Brexit, the UK is no longer a part of that. So they want to hammer out this free trade agreement. The problem is that President Biden has said he's not going to make that happen unless Prime Minister Boris Johnson can come out with a way to uphold what's called the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. So let's go through this. What happened when the UK left the EU was that it compromised this peace deal between Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland, which is basically the rest of the island. It set up this agreement so that there were, no trade stops and no border checks for goods and things like that. With Brexit, that's all been kind of compromised, and you're seeing a bit of a surge. There was some rioting in Belfast over the summer, and there's a concern that if they have to put up some sort of trade border, it could undo this peace agreement. So obviously, President Biden has Irish roots. He says this is an really important issue to him, and he wants to make sure that they address this issue first before they can really hammer out the details on a new U.S.-UK trade agreement.
So they have a couple things to hash out. Christina, what is President Biden's overall strategy heading into the G7 summit set to begin in Cornwall on Friday? What issues are most pressing for the Biden administration right now?
Well, look, I think first he wants to do some face-to-face diplomacy, right? That's something he hasn't been able to do because of COVID. He's the kind of person who really likes to get in there and be social and mix it up, and he wants to be effective. They're going to talk about a lot of transnational issues. Again, they're going to talk about COVID. They're going to talk about COVID travel. They're probably going to spend a lot of time talking about Russian influence in the U.S. They're going to talk about China, and they're going to talk about getting everyone's economies back in gear after what's been a pretty rough year across the board with COVID. And, COVID is not over yet. And a lot of European nations are still seeing spikes. They also want some more vaccines from the U.S. They just announced that 500 million doses will be going to poor and less wealthy countries. But when I was traveling in Europe a couple weeks ago with the Secretary of State, something I heard in almost all of our stops was, if you guys don't want those vaccines, because they watch American news like the rest of us, and they're seeing vaccines going left in states and things like that, can you please ship them over here? I remember when we were in Iceland, somebody said to me, there's there's only like 400,000 of us. Like, can you just give us 400,000 vaccines and we can do the whole island? So hopefully this effort will mitigate some of those feelings of animosity. But there's more to be done, and there's a lot to talk about in only a short amount of time.
Right. As you just said, the president is set to announce that commitment to purchasing 500 million doses of the coronavirus vaccine for global distribution. Is this a priority for the administration because the U.S. wants to appear as a leader in this realm, or is it actually a practical move in as much as we can tamp down the coronavirus anywhere in the world, it will help us here at home?
The administration has been really focusing its messaging on the latter, right? Saying that if this virus is allowed to flourish anywhere, it's a threat to everyone, including Americans. They say they're especially concerned about these variants, and you can't let the virus go unchecked because that lets it mutate and lets it become more dangerous, and it could end up back in the U.S., and it could be, not affected by the vaccines that we've had, and a lot of us have had them at this point. But there's also a geopolitical aspect of this, and that's China and Russia very early on were giving out and selling vaccines to countries even before their own populations. And it was used as kind of a geopolitical diplomatic tool. The U.S. has said that's not what they're doing. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do. But you have to see that there is a bit of diplomatic catch-up being played here. And like I just mentioned, look, even some really close allies are a little bit resentful of the fact that the U.S. has more vaccine doses than anybody else, and for a while, until very recently, wasn't sharing them. So yes, this is the right thing to do if your goal is to keep the virus at bay. But there is also a bit of diplomatic healing to do and be a little bit more magnanimous with our with our vaccine store.
Right. And Christina, of course, the G7 summit is just the first stop for President Biden during his first trip overseas. He's going to be very, very busy. On Monday, he'll be in Brussels for a meeting with our NATO allies. The U.S. relationship with NATO struggled under the Trump administration. How do we expect the president to try and mend those relationships moving forward?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of the same countries who are in the G7, so that helps. The other thing they're really going to be talking about at the NATO meeting is Afghanistan, right? About the decision of the U.S. to leave Afghanistan. Not all the Europeans are really on board with that decision. There's a lot of logistics to figure out. And, everyone's putting on a kind of a strong diplomatic solidarity face. But behind the scenes, sources in European governments have told me they're not sure how this is going to work, and they want more details on the pullout. NATO also has to think about other issues, including Russia, because, the original NATO agreement back in the day after the war was to keep Germany down, the Russians out, and the U.S. involved in Europe. Well, Germany is now in NATO, but the goal of keeping Russian influence, unwanted Russian influence, out of Western Europe is still very much a part of it. And as we've seen this increase in cyber attacks and Russia's, growing efforts to kind of step closer to Western Europe, I think that's something that people want to keep an eye on, and I think it'll be a big topic of discussion among the ministers at that meeting.
All right, and another big topic of discussion among everyone is going to be the highly anticipated meeting between President Biden and Russian President Putin. What are the real concrete points that Mr. Biden hopes to achieve with President Putin during next week's talks? I mean, he's really got to get a strong message across here, doesn't he?
There are enough issues for these men to talk for 2 weeks and still not get through all of them. So I've been told multiple times that we shouldn't be expecting a communique. We shouldn't be expecting some sort of work product out of this, a joint statement, anything like that. What they're doing is they're trying to get in the room, talk to each other. And what I've been told is they're going to focus on some of the bigger picture issues, right? Nuclear arms proliferation, these big transnational treaties. Cyber is going to be an issue, but not quite on the granular level that we've been thinking about. They want to talk about, what do we do with these attacks? How can we set some sort of guardrails to say, like, this is a red line that we can't cross and we can't allow people within your territory to cross. However, again, don't expect them to come out with some sort of an agreement. This is a chance for these leaders to get face to face. President Putin will speak his piece. President Biden will speak his piece. They'll stare at each other and then they'll leave. I don't think they're likely to have a joint press conference. It's unclear what's going to happen after the meeting. But the goal is to kind of get the momentum going, right? To have the two top head of states lay out a broad agenda and then get enough on the same page where their ministers and cabinet officials and under secretaries of whatever can follow up in the months and years to come and try to come up with some concrete work product and agreements and treaties from there.
Yeah, I would imagine, especially around cybersecurity. All right, well, Christina Ruffini, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you.